The sun dipped below the treeline, casting long shadows across the forest floor. A young boy's muffled sobs punctuated the evening air as thick rope cut into his wrists, binding him firmly to the ancient oak. The poachers had left hours ago, their cruel laughter still echoing in his ears. Bears love easy meals they'd taunted before disappearing into the wilderness. Blood from his scraped knees had already attracted curious woodland creatures, but as darkness fell, more dangerous predators would surely come. In the distance, a low growl rumbled through the underbrush. The boy's breath caught in his throat, tears streaming down his dirt-stained face. What cruel fate awaited him in these woods that once felt like home? Would anyone hear his cries before it was too late? The year was at 14. Samuel Hollister was already familiar with the harsh realities of frontier life. His slender frame belied the strength he'd developed from years of hunting, trapping, and tending to his uncle's modest homestead. Since losing his parents to typhoid fever 3 years prior, Samuel had lived with his mother's brother, Jeremiah, a quiet man who spoke more with actions than words. "Remember, boy," Jeremiah would often say while showing Samuel how to track deer through dense underbrush, "nature speaks to those patient enough to listen." When not helping his uncle, Samuel escaped to his special place, a small clearing overlooking Whispering Valley, where he'd spend hours sketching the wildlife and documenting his observations in a leather-bound journal. This journal, a parting gift from his father, contained everything from detailed sketches of eagle nests to notes on wolf pack movements. Samuel's handwriting filled the pages with careful observations, each entry dated and precise. One day, Samuel whispered to himself as he added the finishing touches to a drawing of a fox den. "I'll know these mountains better than anyone." The trading post at Fort Hanson served as the only connection to civilization for the scattered homesteaders in the territory. Once a month, Samuel and Jeremiah would make the day-long journey to trade furs and purchase necessities. It was during one such visit that Samuel first encountered the poachers. 3 men stood by the counter, their conversation hushing as Jeremiah approached with their goods. Their clothes were of finer quality than most frontier folk, but dirt-stained and bearing signs of hard travel. The largest among them, a man with a scar running from his left eye to his chin, eyed Samuel with cold calculation. "Heard tell there's good hunting north of Eagle Pass," the scarred man said to his companions, but his eyes remained fixed on Samuel. "Untapped territory." "That's protected land," Samuel blurted before he could stop himself. "Government ranger rode through last spring and told everyone." Jeremiah's hand clamped firmly on Samuel's shoulder. "The boy means no disrespect," he said evenly. "He's got a fondness for rules is all." The scarred man's smile never reached his eyes. "Seems like a bright lad. Good to know the rules." He tipped his hat. "Silas Wade, at your service. These are my associates, Emmett and Clayton." That night, camped a mile from the fort on their way home, Samuel couldn't shake the unease that had settled over him. "Uncle Jerry, those men at the trading post. Best to forget them, Samuel." Jeremiah interrupted, stoking the campfire. "Some folk aren't meant to be crossed." But 2 days later, when Jeremiah left to check their distant trap lines, Samuel's curiosity got the better of him. Packing his journal, some jerky and his small knife, he set out to follow the fresh tracks he'd spotted heading toward Eagle Pass. The protected lands beyond Eagle Pass were among the most pristine in the territory. As Samuel carefully made his way through dense forest, he documented everything in his journal: unusual tracks, disturbed vegetation, and the occasional spent bullet casing. By midday, he smelled smoke. Crawling on his belly to the edge of a small ridge, Samuel looked down upon a camp where Wade and his men had established operations. The sight turned his stomach. A dozen fresh animal carcasses lay strewn about: bears, wolves, mountain lions, all stripped of particular parts. Some were missing only their gallbladders, others just their paws or teeth. The men were arguing as they worked. Wade's voice carried up the ridge. "The Chinese buyer doesn't care about the quality, just the quantity. We'll get 5 times what the local market pays." Samuel frantically sketched the scene, adding notes about locations and descriptions. So focused was he on documenting the evidence that he failed to notice the fourth man, a scout, until a rifle barrel pressed cold against his neck. "Well now," the man drawled, grabbing Samuel's journal and flipping through the incriminating sketches. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little spy." As Samuel was marched down to the camp, Wade's expression shifted from surprise to amusement, and finally to something much darker. "The boy from the trading post," he said, taking Samuel's journal and examining the detailed drawings. "Seems you've been busy." Samuel stood as tall as his trembling legs would allow. "The ranger will stop you." Wade's laugh echoed through the tree. "Rangers only come through twice a year, boy, and you won't be around to tell tales when they do." Samuel had spent years creating his hand-drawn map of the wilderness. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard in his room, the carefully aged parchment detailed every creek, ravine, and animal trail for 20 miles in all directions from his uncle's cabin. Unlike the vague government surveys, Samuel's map marked the seasonal movements of elk herds, denning sites of predators, and the best fishing holes that changed with spring floods. After witnessing the poachers' camp, Samuel had started marking their movements with small red X's, connecting them with dotted lines that revealed patterns even he found disturbing. They were systematically slaughtering every valuable predator in the territory. Samuel traced his finger along the route toward Eagle Pass, murmuring to himself, "If they keep moving north at this pace, they'll hit the grizzly denning grounds by next week." The forbidden territory beyond Eagle Pass was a riot of natural splendor. Ancient pines rose like cathedral spires, their bases carpeted with emerald moss. Shafts of golden sunlight pierced the canopy, illuminating dancing motes of pollen and seed. In spring, wildflowers painted the forest floor in splashes of color: purple lupine, orange paintbrush, and yellow balsam root. Samuel moved silently through this beauty, his moccasins barely disturbing the pine needle carpet. Uncle Jeremiah had taught him to walk like the Shoshone heel to toe, testing each step before committing weight. His progress was slow but virtually soundless. By midday, Samuel reached a ridgeline overlooking a narrow valley. The smell hit him first, blood and viscera baking in the sun. Below, half hidden among the trees, lay the aftermath of the poacher's latest hunt. 3 grizzly carcasses, their paws and gallbladders harvested, rotted in the June heat. Nearby, 2 wolf packs had been similarly butchered, their valuable pelts gone. Samuel's hands shook as he added these new atrocities to his map, marking the location with a larger red X. His jaw clenched in anger, not just at the waste of life, but at the imbalance such slaughter would create. Without predators, the elk and deer would overpopulate, overgraze the valley, and eventually starve come winter. "This has to stop," he whispered, carefully folding his map and tucking it into his shirt. Following the fresh trail leading north from the killing ground, Samuel moved with heightened caution. The poachers were getting bolder, hunting closer to settlements. He needed to determine their next target area before returning to warn his uncle. The forest thinned as he climbed higher, offering less cover. Samuel dropped to his belly and crawled the final yards to a rocky outcrop. Below him, the poachers had established a more permanent camp beside a small lake. 2 canvas tents, 4 horses, and a wagon partially concealed under pine boughs. Wade sat on a log, cleaning a high-powered rifle. The other men were processing their grim harvest, cutting, scraping, and preserving parts for transport. A small iron pot bubbled over the fire, filling the air with a medicinal smell as they rendered bear fat for salves. "Chinese merchants coming through Helena next month," Wade was saying. "Says he'll take all we can get. Bear paws fetch $20 a pair in San Francisco, 5 times that in Shanghai." Samuel inched closer, straining to hear their plans. His elbow dislodged a small stone that clattered down the slope. It was a tiny sound, barely audible over the men's conversation, but enough to alert the scout standing watch at the camp's edge. The man's head snapped up, eyes narrowing as he scanned the ridge. "Boss," he called softly, "something's up there." Wade set down his rifle. "Probably just a marmot. Check it anyway." Samuel froze, pressing himself flatter against the warm rock. The scout began climbing the slope, hand resting on the revolver at his hip. Samuel could retreat or remain hidden, neither option promising. He chose a third option. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small stone and threw it far to his left. It clattered among the rocks on the opposite side of the ridge. The scout's attention immediately shifted toward the noise, and he changed course. Samuel seized the moment to begin a careful backward retreat. 1 inch at a time, he slid away from the ridge's edge. 10 feet back, he would have enough cover to stand and run. 8 feet, 6 feet, 4 feet. A shadow fell across him. Samuel looked up to see Emmett, the second of Wade's men, grinning down at him with tobacco-stained teeth. "Well now," Emmett said, leveling a shotgun at Samuel's chest. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little spy." Samuel's father's pocket watch had been the only possession of value the man had owned. Silver-cased with intricate engravings of forest scenes, it had kept perfect time for 20 years. When typhoid took both his parents, Samuel had found comfort in the steady tick-tick-tick against his palm, a heartbeat that continued when his father's had stopped. Now, as rough hands dragged him down the slope toward Wade's camp, Samuel felt the watch slip from his pocket and tumble among the rocks. He twisted desperately, reaching back, but Emmett's grip tightened. "Keep moving, boy," he growled, shoving Samuel forward. The crack of glass and metal striking stone echoed in Samuel's ears louder than his captor's words. Something irreplaceable was broken, and Samuel felt a cold emptiness spread through his chest. Wade rose as they approached, wiping his hands on a blood-stained cloth. His eyes, pale blue like winter ice, assessed Samuel with clinical detachment. "Twice our paths cross, young woodsman," Wade said, his voice surprisingly cultured. "I don't believe in coincidence. You've been following us." Samuel kept his silence, eyes darting between the men. The camp was worse up close. What he'd taken for bundles of furs were actually dozens of bear paws strung together like macabre garlands. Teeth and claws, sorted by size, filled wooden crates. The metallic smell of blood mixed with pine smoke turned his stomach. "Search him," Wade ordered. Rough hands emptied Samuel's pockets. His small knife, a piece of jerky, a tin matchbox. Clayton, the youngest poacher, whistled as he pulled the folded map from Samuel's shirt. "Boss, you'll want to see this." Wade took the map, unfolding it carefully. His expression shifted from curiosity to genuine surprise as he took in the detailed rendering of the territory. His finger traced the red marks Samuel had made. "You've been tracking us for some time," he said, looking up sharply. "Who else knows about this?" Samuel lifted his chin. "Everyone, the rangers, my uncle, the sheriff, at Fort Hanson." Wade studied him for a long moment before chuckling. "You're a poor liar, boy. If authorities knew what we were doing, they'd have sent more than a child to watch us." He folded the map carefully and tucked it into his own coat. "But this is impressive work. Useful, even." "I won't help you," Samuel said, finding his voice. "You already have," Wade replied, tapping his pocket where the map now rested. "Question is what to do with you now." The men exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Samuel felt cold fear spreading through his limbs. "Can't let him go," the scout said. "He'll bring the law." "Can't keep him neither," Emmett added. "Slows us down." Wade rubbed his bearded chin thoughtfully. "There's a third option." The next hours passed in a blur of fear and pain. Samuel was tied to a post inside one of the tents, listening as the men debated his fate. They ate dinner, drank whiskey, and discussed him as if he were an inconvenient piece of furniture rather than a human being. Night fell. The campfire outside cast moving shadows against the canvas walls. Samuel worked at his bindings until his wrists were raw and bleeding, but the knots only tightened. Near dawn, Wade entered the tent alone. He squatted before Samuel, studying him with those pale eyes. "You have spirit," he said quietly. "Reminds me of my own boy before the fever took him." A flicker of something human crossed his face before vanishing. But sentimentality is bad for business. What are you going to do? Samuel asked, hating the tremor in his voice. You've seen our operation. You know the territory. Wade gestured with the map. In another life I might have taken you on, taught you the trade. He sighed. Instead, you'll serve as a lesson for anyone else thinking to interfere with our work. They came for him as morning light filtered through the trees. 4 men, faces now hardened with purpose, dragged him deep into the forest. Samuel fought, kicked, even bit Emmett's hand hard enough to draw blood. But he was no match for grown men. They chose an ancient oak, its massive trunk wider than 2 men could encircle. Samuel was forced against it. Rough rope wound multiple times around his chest and the tree. Bears will smell your blood for miles, Clayton said, tightening the knots until the rope bit into Samuel's flesh. Fitting end for a meddler. Wade was the last to leave, pausing to place Samuel's damaged pocket watch on a rock just out of reach. Time runs out for all of us eventually, boy, he said, almost gently. Yours just came sooner than most. Marshal James Blackwood polished his silver deputy badge with the corner of his bandana, a habit born of respect rather than vanity. 15 years as a lawman had taught him that symbols matter. Out here in the territories where settlements were scattered and isolation bred its own brand of justice, the gleaming star he wore was often the only reminder of civilization's reach. Blackwood wasn't supposed to be in this part of the Montana Territory. His jurisdiction ended 30 miles south, but reports of poaching and rumors of worse had drawn him northward. The territorial governor wouldn't approve this unauthorized patrol, but Blackwood had long ago learned to trust his instincts over protocol. At 45, Blackwood cut an imposing figure, despite the silver threading his dark hair and beard. Years frontier living had weathered his face like tanned leather, deep lines etched around eyes that missed little. He'd buried a wife and daughter to Sioux raiders in '67, and the decade since had hardened something inside him, even as it refined his sense of justice. "Come on, Shadow," he murmured to the knit-in black stallion beneath him. "Let's find a place to make camp before we lose the light." The summer sun was already dipping toward the western peaks, casting long shadows through the pines. Blackwood guided his horse toward a small clearing near a creek, a defensible position with water and grazing for Shadow. He'd learned survival from both Army scouts and crow hunters. In the wilderness, a poor campsite could be a death sentence. As he unsaddled Shadow, Blackwood mentally reviewed what he knew about the poaching operation. 3 or possibly 4 men, well armed, moving systematically through protected lands. They weren't local trappers harvesting for survival. These were commercial hunters, taking only the most valuable parts of predators, likely for the Chinese medicine trade. Such men were doubly dangerous. They operated outside the law and had nothing invested in the territory's future. Blackwood had just finished building a small, smokeless fire when Shadow's ears pricked forward. The horse nickered softly, head turning toward the northern forest. Blackwood froze, hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver on his hip. Years of ranger work had taught him to trust his horse's senses over his own. He waited, listening. The evening forest sounds had continued uninterrupted, birds settling for the night, the distant yip of coyotes beginning their hunt. Whatever had caught Shadow's attention wasn't large enough to silence the wildlife. Not a bear or mountain lion there. Just as Blackwood began to relax, he heard it. Faint but unmistakable, a human cry, distant but carried on the evening breeze. It came again, higher pitched than a man's voice. A child or woman in distress. "Damn it all," Blackwood muttered, quickly retrieving his Winchester rifle from its scabbard. He'd seen too many traps in his years as a marshal. False cries meant to lure the unwary, ambushes set with human bait. But he'd also seen the aftermath of failing to respond. He couldn't risk riding Shadow toward potential danger. Securing the horse with enough slack to escape if trouble came, Blackwood moved into the forest on foot. The Winchester balanced comfortably in his hands, a familiar extension of his will. His moccasined feet moved silently over the pine needle floor, each step carefully placed to avoid betraying his approach. The cries grew more distinct, as he advanced, desperation evident in their tone. Young, male, genuine terror. Blackwood quickened his pace, moving in a half-crouch through the undergrowth. After 20 minutes of careful progress, he caught the scent, the unmistakable coppery smell of fresh blood. Dropping to a full crouch, Blackwood used a fallen log for cover as he surveyed the scene ahead. An ancient oak stood in a small clearing, its massive trunk silhouetted against the deepening twilight. Bound to it was a boy of perhaps 13 or 14, head slumped forward in exhaustion. Blood stained the ropes at his wrists, where he had struggled against his bonds. Blackwood's jaw tightened as he took in the scene. This was no random act of cruelty. The boy had been positioned like bait, his blood allowed to flow to attract predators. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted him dead. They'd wanted him to suffer, to be torn apart by whatever apex predator caught the scent first. Movement at the forest edge pulled Blackwood's attention. A massive shape, brown and lumbering, emerged cautiously into the clearing. The grizzly rose on its hind legs, nose testing the air, picking up the irresistible scent of vulnerable prey. The boy, seeing the bear, renewed his struggles, his weakened cries, now tinged with the certainty of imminent death. Blackwood raised his Winchester. He had mere seconds to make his decision. Blackwood's Winchester rifle had been with him since the war. Its walnut stock bore the scars and polished smoothness of a tool used daily, its brass fittings gleaming from regular care. The rifle was more than a weapon. It was a lifeline in a land where help might be days away. The grizzly lowered onto all fours, its massive head swinging towards Samuel. At nearly 800 pounds, the bear could tear through rope and flesh with terrifying ease. The boy had gone still, perhaps understanding that movement would only trigger the predator's instincts faster. Blackwood had a clear shot, but firing would alert anyone within miles. If the poachers were nearby, the rifle's report would draw them like moths to flame. Yet hesitation meant death for the boy. The marshal inhaled slowly, centering himself. The Winchester rose to his shoulder, its familiar weight an extension of his body. He aimed not at the bear's head or heart, but at the ground several feet to its side. The rifle's crack shattered the evening silence. Dirt and pine needles exploded where the bullet struck, startling the massive grizzly. The bear reared up again, roaring in confusion rather than aggression. Blackwood chambered another round and fired a second warning shot. Faced with an unknown threat, the bear made its choice. With surprising speed for its bulk, it wheeled around and crashed back into the forest's protective embrace. Blackwood waited, counting his breaths, making certain the animal was truly retreating before approaching the tree. The boy's eyes widened as Blackwood emerged from cover, rifle still at the ready. Fear, hope, and disbelief warred across his dirt-streaked face. "Easy, son," Blackwood said, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm Marshal Blackwood. I'm here to help." Up close, the cruelty of the boy's situation became even more apparent. The ropes had been tied with deliberate skill, cutting into his wrists and chest with every movement. Blood from his wounds had soaked into the bark, a scent beacon for predators. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted the boy dead. They'd wanted him to suffer. "Can you tell me your name?" Blackwood asked, unsheathing his hunting knife and beginning to saw through the thick ropes. "Samuel," the boy managed through cracked lips. "Samuel Hollis." "How long have you been here, Samuel?" "Since morning." His voice was barely a whisper. "They left me for the bears." The final rope fell away. Samuel collapsed forward, his legs buckling beneath him. Blackwood caught him easily, surprised at how light the boy felt in his arms. "Who did this to you?" "Poachers. Man named Wade." Samuel's eyes fluttered as shock and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. "4 of them. They're killing everything, selling parts to Chinese merchants." Blackwood's jaw tightened. He'd tracked men like this before, had seen the devastation they left in their wake. Men who slaughtered not for food or survival, but for those profits of distant markets. "We need to move," Blackwood said, lifting Samuel. They might have heard the shot. He carried the boy through the deepening twilight, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. Samuel drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring about maps and watches. The marshal's campsite was a mile away, far enough to be safe, close enough to reach before full dark. Shadow nickered softly as they approached. Blackwood gently set Samuel down beside the small fire, noting with concern the boy's pallor and the heat radiating from his skin. Infection had already set into some of the deeper rope burns. Working quickly, Blackwood retrieved a canteen and medical supplies from his saddlebags. He cleaned and dressed Samuel's wounds, coaxing the semi-conscious boy to drink water between applications of antiseptic salve. "My uncle," Samuel mumbled as Blackwood wrapped a clean bandage around his wrist. "He won't know where. We'll find him," Blackwood assured him, though he suspected the uncle might already be searching. Or worse, men cruel enough to stake a boy out for bears wouldn't hesitate to kill an adult. As the fire cast dancing shadows across the clearing, Blackwood prepared a simple broth from his provisions. The smell roused Samuel from his fitful dozing. "Why were you out here alone?" Blackwood asked, helping the boy sit up to sip from the tin cup. Samuel's eyes, though glazed with fever, held a stubborn determination. "They're killing everything. I was tracking them, marking their camps on my map." His face fell. "Wade took it. My map. It showed all their hunting grounds." "You tracked poachers by yourself?" Blackwood couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. Most grown men wouldn't have attempted it. Samuel nodded weakly. "Someone had to stop them." Blackwood studied the boy with newfound respect. Foolish, perhaps, but brave beyond his years. As Samuel drifted back to sleep, the marshal made his decision. The poachers would be expecting a lone, injured boy to die in the wilderness, not a territorial marshal with 30 years of frontier experience hunting them. Dawn broke with soft fingers of light filtering through the pines. Samuel awakened to the unfamiliar comfort of a bedroll, momentarily disoriented until the previous day's horrors came rushing back. He jerked upright, wincing as pain flared through his bandaged wrists. "Easy there," came a deep voice. Marshal Blackwood knelt by a small fire, coffee pot balanced on hot stones. "Those wounds need time to heal." Samuel observed his rescuer in proper daylight. Blackwood was tall and weathered, with the lean hardness of a man who lived by his wits in unforgiving country. His dark hair and beard showed silver streaks, but there was nothing old in his movements as he poured coffee into a tin cup. "Hungry?" Blackwood asked, offering a plate of pan-fried bacon and hardtack. Samuel's stomach growled in response. He hadn't eaten since before his capture. He accepted the food with bandaged hands, suddenly self-conscious under the marshal's steady gaze. "Thank you," Samuel said between careful bites, "for saving my life." Blackwood nodded once. "Any man would have done the same." "No," Samuel replied with a wisdom beyond his years. "They wouldn't." They ate in companionable silence until Samuel's strength returned enough to speak more. He told Blackwood everything about his uncle Jeremiah, his detailed map of the territory, following the poachers, and his eventual capture. The marshal listened without interruption, only his tightening jaw betraying his anger at Wade's cruelty. "I need to get back to my uncle," Samuel finally said. "He'll be worried." "Your uncle's cabin, how far?" "About 15 miles southwest, near Whispering Valley." Blackwood considered this. "We'll head there first, but those men might have gone there looking for you." The implications hung heavy in the morning air. Samuel stared into the fire, unable to voice his deepest fear that his uncle might already be dead because of his reckless tracking of the poacher. As they broke camp, Blackwood retrieved something from his saddlebag, a hunting knife in a weathered leather sheath. Not fancy like some Samuel had seen at the trading post, but practical and well-maintained, its blade honed to a perfect edge. "This was my first knife," Blackwood said, holding it out. "Got it when I was about your age. Time it belonged to someone who'd use it right." Samuel accepted the knife with reverence, feeling the perfect balance of the handle in his palm. "I can't take this, sir." "You can and will," Blackwood replied firmly. "A man needs proper tools out here, and after what you've been through, You've earned the right to call yourself a man. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. Samuel carefully attached the knife to his belt, standing taller despite his injuries. They traveled slowly through the morning, Samuel riding double with Blackwood on Shadow. The marshal used the journey to teach, pointing out signs Samuel had missed in his tracking, broken twigs indicating direction, displaced stones showing weight, partial boot prints revealing a limp in one of the poachers. "You've got good instincts," Blackwood acknowledged after Samuel correctly identified a day-old deer trail. "But instinct needs training to become skill." By midday, they stopped beside a stream to rest Shadow and change Samuel's bandages. As Blackwood worked, Samuel noticed a worn photograph partially visible in the marshal's shirt pocket. "Is that your family?" he asked hesitantly. Blackwood's hands stilled momentarily. He finished wrapping the bandage before carefully withdrawing the faded photograph. A woman with kind eyes and a young girl with Blackwood's smile looked back from across time. "My wife Catherine and daughter Emma," he said quietly. "Sioux raid winter of '67. I was away riding circuit as a territorial judge back then." Samuel swallowed hard, recognizing the shared wound of loss. "My parents died 3 years ago. Typhoid." Blackwood nodded, returning the photograph to his pocket. "Loss changes a man, makes him either harder or wiser. Or both," Samuel ventured. The marshal's eyes crinkled slightly, not quite a smile but an acknowledgement. "Perhaps so." As they continued their journey, Samuel shared stories of his uncle's teachings about the wilderness, while Blackwood spoke of his years enforcing frontier justice. Despite their age difference, they found common ground in their respect for the land and its laws. When they crested a ridge overlooking a familiar valley, Samuel pointed to a thin column of smoke rising from the trees. "That's my uncle's cabin," he said, relief washing through him. "He's home." But Blackwood's posture had stiffened, his experienced eyes catching what Samuel had missed. The smoke was too thick, too dark, not from a cooking fire or well-tended hearth, but from something larger burning unchecked. "Samuel," the marshal said gently, "that's not a chimney fire." Samuel's heart plummeted as understanding dawned. He urged Shadow forward, but Blackwood held him back with a firm hand. "We approach careful-like," he cautioned, drawing his Winchester. "Could be they're waiting for someone to come investigating." The smoldering ruins of the cabin sent tendrils of acrid smoke skyward. What had once been a sturdy frontier home was now a blackened skeleton, support beams jutting like charred bones from the ashes. Samuel stood motionless, his young face a mask of devastation as he surveyed what remained of his life with his uncle. "Jeremiah," he called, voice cracking. "Uncle Jerry." Blackwood placed a restraining hand on the boy's shoulder. "Stay behind me," he ordered, Winchester at the ready as they approached. The marshal moved with practiced caution, scanning for signs of ambush. Finding none, he began a methodical search of the ruins and surrounding area. Samuel followed numbly, hope diminishing with each passing minute. "No bodies," Blackwood announced after completing his survey. "That's something." Samuel knelt beside the remains of his small bedroom. His few possessions were gone. Books, sketches, the small carved animals his father had made him. Everything reduced to cinders and memory. "Why would they do this?" he asked, ash coating his fingers as he sifted through the debris. "Sending a message," Blackwood replied grimly. "Men like Wade don't allow witnesses." The marshal crouched suddenly, attention caught by something in the dirt near the cabin's former doorway. "Look here," he said, beckoning Samuel closer. Pressing the dirt flat with his palm, Blackwood produced a length of braided leather cord from his pocket. Samuel recognized it immediately. The marshal's tracking rope, a teaching tool used by scouts and guides. Its weighted ends could be laid alongside tracks to measure stride, depth, and direction. 5 men, Blackwood demonstrated, laying the rope alongside barely visible boot prints. 1. Your uncle, I'm guessing, was forced to walk ahead of 4 others. See how these prints are deeper at the heel. Man being pushed forward. Samuel's hands trembled. "He's alive," was when they left here. Blackwood confirmed, his tone carefully neutral. Took him that way. He nodded toward the trail leading northwest. We have to follow them, Samuel said, already moving toward Shadow. Blackwood caught his arm. We will. But smart, not reckless. Over the next hour, Blackwood gave Samuel a crash course in advanced tracking. Using the braided rope, he showed how to determine not just direction, but the condition of those leaving the trail, who carried weight, who favored a leg, who walked point. This man, Blackwood said, indicating a particular set of prints, always walks slightly ahead of the others. Leaders do that unconsciously. That'll be Wade. And this one? Samuel asked, pointing to prints that occasionally wandered off the main path. The scout, checking the back trail, looking for followers. They salvaged what they could from the cabin ruins, a cast-iron skillet, some tools buried under a collapsed wall, ammunition from a hidden cache. Jeremiah had maintained. Samuel found his father's compass, its crystal cracked but needle still true, buried beneath the floorboards of his room. By midday, they were following the trail northward, moving at a pace that balanced speed with stealth. Samuel, despite his lingering injuries, kept up without complaint. The gravity of their mission allowed no room for weakness. Wade's heading toward Timber Creek, Samuel observed as they crested a ridge. It's the nearest settlement. Makes sense, Blackwood nodded. They'll need supplies, and it's far enough from your cabin that they won't be connected to the fire. As they descended through a dense pine forest, Blackwood suddenly raised his hand in warning. Samuel froze, instantly alert to the marshal's tension. Silent communication passed between them, the boy already attuned to his mentor's signals after just a day together. Blackwood pointed to a fallen log, 20 yards ahead. Fresh bark had been scraped away, and beneath it, a thin wire stretched across the path at ankle height. Trip wire, Blackwood whispered, connected to that shotgun. Samuel followed his gaze and saw it, a carefully concealed firearm, rigged to fire when the wire was disturbed. The scout had prepared a deadly welcome for any pursuers. How did you see it? Samuel asked as they carefully skirted the trap. Didn't, smelled it. At Samuel's confused look, Blackwood explained, gun oil. On a hot day like today, it has a scent if you know to look for it. The discovery reinforced the danger they faced. Wade and his men were experienced killers, not just poachers. They anticipated pursuit and were prepared to kill again to protect their operation. As evening approached, they found themselves on a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. Below, a thin column of smoke rose from a carefully concealed camp. Through Blackwood's brass spyglass, Samuel could make out 2 figures moving around a small fire. 2 men, not 5. A forward camp, Blackwood surmised. The others, including your uncle, have continued to Timber Creek while these 2 watch the back trail. Samuel studied the camp layout, already thinking like a tracker. If we circle around through that ravine, we could approach from the east without being seen. Blackwood regarded the boy with quiet approval. We could, but then we take them, Samuel said, with a determination that surprised even himself. They'll know where Wade took my uncle. The marshal nodded slowly, a plan already forming. After dark, he agreed. We'll need information if we're going to find your uncle. And for that, we need one of them alive and talking. Timber Creek appeared through the morning mist, like a vision from another world. After 3 days of hard riding and living off the land, the sight of wooden buildings and smoking chimneys struck Samuel as almost unreal. The frontier settlement consisted of little more than 24 structures huddled along a rutted main street, but to a boy who'd known only wilderness for days, it seemed a metropolis. Remember, Blackwood cautioned, as they approached, we're just passing through. Father and son, looking to trade furs. Nothing more, Samuel nodded, pulling his borrowed hat lower. The information they'd extracted from the captured poacher, after Blackwood had employed methods Samuel would rather forget, had confirmed their suspicion. Wade and the others had indeed brought Uncle Jeremiah to Timber Creek, but their purpose remained unclear. The captured man had surrendered one final piece of information before Blackwood had left him bound, but alive in the forest. A crumpled wanted poster showing Silas Wade's face beneath the words, "Wanted for murder." The reward, $500 dead or alive, spoke volumes about Wade's true nature. This was no simple poacher, but a notorious outlaw using the wilderness as his cover. Now that tattered poster lay carefully folded in Samuel's pocket, a reminder of what they faced. Blackwood led them not to the general store or saloon, but to the sheriff's office, a squat building with a simple wooden star hanging above its door. "Wait with shadow," he instructed Samuel. "Keep your eyes open." As Blackwood disappeared inside, Samuel surveyed the street from atop the stallion. Timber Creek appeared peaceful enough. A blacksmith hammered at his forge. Women carried baskets of goods between shops. A group of children played with a hoop and stick. Yet something felt wrong. The glances toward them were too long, too wary. The marshal emerged sooner than expected, his face carefully blank. "Come on," he said shortly, remounting behind Samuel. "We're getting supplies and moving on." Once beyond earshot of the sheriff's office, Blackwood's voice dropped to a whisper. "Sheriff Parker knows Wade. Called him a businessman with interests in the territory. What about my uncle? Parker claims no strangers have come through town in weeks." They stopped at the general store, where Blackwood purchased only essentials: ammunition, salt, coffee, and bandages. As the shopkeeper wrapped their purchases, Samuel noticed a map of the territory pinned to the wall. Markings indicated mining claims, trapping territories, and cattle ranges, information worth its weight in gold out here. "Trouble up at Eagle Ridge," the shopkeeper commented, following Samuel's gaze. "Whole area's been cordoned off by order of Sheriff Parker. Mining accident, they say." Blackwood maintained his facade of disinterest. "That's a strange kind of accident that needs armed men patrolling the perimeter," the shopkeeper muttered. "But you didn't hear that from me." Outside, loading their supplies onto Shadow, Blackwood's expression was grim. "Eagle Ridge. It's an old mining camp, abandoned after the silver played out. The perfect place to hide," Samuel realized. They made one final stop at the livery stable to purchase a second horse, a sturdy mountain pony for Samuel. As Blackwood negotiated with the stableman, Samuel wandered toward a notice board covered with advertisements, announcements, and more wanted posters. His blood ran cold when he saw it, a crude sketch of his own face under the words "missing boy." Below that, an offer of $50 for information leading to his whereabouts, signed by Sheriff Parker himself. Samuel backed away, bumping into a solid form behind him. He turned to find himself face to face with a deputy, whose eyes narrowed with sudden recognition. "Say now," the deputy drawled. "Ain't you my son?" Blackwood interrupted smoothly, appearing at Samuel's side. "Been mistaken for that missing boy twice already today. Poor lad does bear a resemblance." The deputy studied them both, suspicion evident. "Sheriff might want to speak with you anyway. Another time perhaps," Blackwood said, his hand casually resting near his holstered pistol. "We're expected in Helena by week's end." A tense moment passed before the deputy stepped aside with obvious reluctance. Samuel could feel the man's eyes boring into their backs as they led their horses down the street. "We're being watched," Samuel whispered once they were mounted and riding toward the edge of town. "I know," Blackwood replied. "3 men, one by the saloon, one at the gunsmith, another just mounted up behind us. What do we do? Ride easy until we're out of sight of town. Then we lose them." True to his word, Blackwood led them on a leisurely pace until the settlement disappeared behind a stand of pines. Then he abruptly turned their horses up a rocky creek bed, leaving no tracks to follow. For the next 2 hours, the marshal employed every trick of his rangering days, crossing streams, doubling back, using rocky terrain that held no prints. By the time they emerged onto a ridge overlooking the valley, Samuel was certain no one could have followed their circuitous route. "Eagle Ridge is there," Blackwood said, pointing to a distant bluff. "If your uncle is alive, that's where we'll find him." The unspoken thought hung between them. If he's still alive, 3 days had passed since the cabin burned. Much could happen to a captive in that time. "We'll need a plan," Samuel said, unconsciously touching the hunting knife at his belt. Blackwood nodded, his weathered face solemn. "And we'll need to be ready for a fight." Dawn found them hidden in a dense thicket of pines, observing the comings and goings at Timber Creek through Blackwood's brass spyglass. After their narrow escape the previous day, the marshal had insisted they circle back to gather intelligence before heading to Eagle Ridge. "Know your enemy's movements before you make your own," he'd instructed Samuel. The town had transformed overnight. What had seemed merely watchful now appeared openly hostile. Armed men, not regular deputies, but hard-faced strangers with rifles, patrolled the streets. Riders came and went, carrying messages to parts unknown. "They're searching for us," Samuel observed, as another group of mounted men galloped from town. "Not just searching," Blackwood corrected grimly. "Preparing." While Samuel kept watch, Blackwood carefully unfolded a piece of paper he'd removed from the sheriff's office during their brief visit. A telegraph message intercepted from the operator's desk when the man had turned his back. Its contents had confirmed his worst suspicions about Timber Creek. "Parker, stop shipment, arrives Tuesday. Stop ensure passage, secured. Stop no interference tolerated. Stop eliminate witnesses. Stop Wade." "We need to get into that telegraph office," Blackwood decided. "Find out exactly what shipment they're expecting and what it has to do with your uncle." Under cover of darkness, they left their horses concealed and approached the town from the west, using the shadows of the lumber mill as cover. Samuel moved with newfound stealth, applying all Blackwood had taught him about moving unseen. The telegraph office sat at the far end of town, a small building attached to the stagecoach station. A single lamp burned inside despite the late hour. Blackwood gestured for Samuel to follow as they slipped behind the row of buildings, keeping to the narrow alleyways between structures. "Stay here," Blackwood whispered when they reached the rear of the telegraph office. "Keep watch. 2 whistles if anyone approaches." Samuel nodded, gripping the hunting knife Blackwood had given him. The marshal disappeared around the corner, silent as a mounting cat. Minutes stretched interminably, Samuel's every sense strained in the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a piano played a tinny tune from the saloon. Closer, a dog barked once and fell silent. The back door of the telegraph office opened, and Blackwood emerged, his expression thunderous even in the dim starlight. He beckoned Samuel to follow, retreating deeper into the shadows behind the stagecoach station. "Wade's operation is bigger than poaching," Blackwood explained once they were safely concealed. "He's running guns, military rifles stolen from an army shipment, bound for Fort Benton. Sheriff Parker is his partner. What does my uncle have to do with it?" Samuel asked, dread pooling in his stomach. He witnessed something he shouldn't have. The telegraph log shows messages about an interfering trapper, dating back to before you were captured. The pieces fell into place in Samuel's mind. That's why Wade was in our territory. They weren't just hunting there, they were moving guns through it. And your uncle stumbled onto their operation. Blackwood nodded. They've been holding him at Eagle Ridge, waiting for their shipment to arrive before they... The marshal didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. As they prepared to retreat from town, a shout rose from the direction of the telegraph office. The operator had discovered the break-in. "Run," Blackwood ordered, pushing Samuel toward their escape route. They sprinted through the darkness, pursued by the growing clamor of alarmed voices. A gunshot cracked the night air, the bullet splintering wood nearby. More shots followed as deputies poured from the sheriff's office and saloon. Rounding the livery stable, they found their path blocked by 2 armed men. Blackwood drew and fired in one fluid motion, dropping one attacker. The other swung his rifle toward Samuel, but the boy was already moving, ducking beneath the swing and driving his shoulder into the man's midsection. They tumbled to the ground, struggling in the dirt. A massive fist caught Samuel across the jaw, sending him sprawling. The man rose, leveling his rifle at the dazed boy. Blackwood's second shot never came. The marshal was engaged in his own desperate struggle with 2 more deputies, who had appeared from the shadows. Amiel stared up the rifle barrel, certain his brief life was ending. A deafening blast filled the night, but it was the deputy who fell, a surprised expression frozen on his face as he collapsed. Behind him stood a grizzled old man holding a smoking shotgun. "This way, boy," he hissed, gesturing toward a hidden gap between buildings. "Bring your friend." Blackwood dispatched his remaining attacker with a powerful blow and joined Samuel. The old man led them through a maze of back alleys and storage yards until they reached the edge of town. Their mysterious savior said nothing until they were safely concealed in a root cellar beneath an abandoned cabin. "Name's Harlan," he finally introduced himself, lighting a small lantern. "Been watching you too. Figured anybody Sheriff Parker wants dead is a friend of mine. Why help us?" Blackwood asked, suspicion evident. Harlan's weathered face hardened. "Parker and Wade killed my son last year. Called it a hunting accident. Been waiting for a chance at them ever since." Samuel and Blackwood exchanged glances. They had found an unexpected ally, and perhaps their only hope of reaching Eagle Ridge alive. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor hues as Blackwood led Samuel through a series of wilderness exercises. They had established a temporary camp in a hidden valley 2 miles from Harlan's cabin, well away from the searching parties that still combed the area around Timber Creek. "Navigation isn't just about knowing where you are," Blackwood explained, holding out a brass star compass that gleamed in the early light. "It's about knowing where everything else is in relation to you." Samuel turned the beautiful instrument in his hands, admiring the craftsmanship. Unlike a regular compass, this one contained additional markings for celestial navigation and a series of specialized measurements along its edges. "My father gave me that when I joined the Army Scouts," Blackwood said, a rare hint of sentimentality in his voice. "Saved my life more times than I can count during the war." Samuel carefully aligned the compass with the rising sun. "East," he confirmed, then pointed without looking, "which makes that north, the Creek Valley west, and Eagle Ridge to the south-southwest." Blackwood nodded approvingly. "You're a natural wayfinder. Now let's see about making you a marksman." The day's lessons progressed from navigation to tracking, from wilderness survival to self-defense. Blackwood pushed Samuel relentlessly, treating him not as a child, but as an equal partner in their dangerous mission. For his part, Samuel absorbed every lesson with fierce determination, driven by thoughts of his captive uncle. Again, Blackwood instructed after Samuel missed his target during shooting practice. "Remember, breathe first, then squeeze. Don't pull." Samuel raised the pistol, focusing as Blackwood had taught him. This time the shot struck the center of the improvised target, a pine cone placed on a distant stump. Pleasure at his success mingled with an unsettling realization that he was learning to kill. "Does it get easy?" Samuel asked quietly as they cleaned their weapons beside the small, smokeless fire. Taking a life, Blackwood's weathered hands paused their methodical work. "It shouldn't," he said finally. "The day killing comes easy is the day you become like Wade. But he deserves to die for what he's done." "Perhaps, but vengeance and justice aren't the same thing, son." Blackwood reassembled his revolver with practiced efficiency. "Vengeance serves the one dealing it. Justice serves everyone." As darkness fell, they sat beneath a blanket of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Samuel had never ventured this far from home before his ordeal began. Despite the circumstances, he found himself marveling at the vastness of the territory and his own smallness within it. "My father wanted me to be a doctor," Samuel confessed, breaking the comfortable silence. "Said I had the right kind of mind for it. Patient, observant." Blackwood nodded thoughtfully. "You do. Good qualities for a lawman, too. Is that what I'm becoming? A lawman? What do you want to become, Samuel?" The boy stared into the dying embers of their fire. "I want to make sure no one else suffers like I have, like my uncle has." He looked up at the marshal. "I want to protect the innocent." Something shifted in Blackwood's expression. A recognition, perhaps, or a memory. That's a worthy path, he said softly, but it comes with a cost. Loneliness, hard choices, seeing the worst in people. I've already seen the worst, Samuel replied, unconsciously touching the healing rope burns at his wrists. Yes, Blackwood agreed. I suppose you have. The following day brought Harlan to their hidden camp, carrying supplies and news from town. The old man moved with surprising stealth for his age, appearing so suddenly that Samuel nearly shot him before recognizing their ally. Wade's men are moving supplies to Eagle Ridge, Harlan reported as they shared a simple meal. Ammunition, provisions. Something big is happening. The weapons shipment, Blackwood surmised. It must be arriving soon. Day after tomorrow, Harlan confirmed. Overheard Parker telling his deputy. They're bringing in extra men from Helena. Samuel leaned forward intently. Any word about my uncle? Harlan's weathered face softened with sympathy. He's alive, boy. One of the men mentioned guarding a trapper at the ridge. Said he was strong-willed for an old man. Relief washed through Samuel like a physical force. His uncle was alive. There was still hope. We'll need to move soon, Blackwood decided, before the shipment arrives and Wade's force grows stronger. As night descended once more, Samuel found himself unable to sleep. The knowledge that they would soon attempt to infiltrate Eagle Ridge, facing Wade and his men in their stronghold, filled him with both determination and dread. Blackwood, ever attuned to his young companion's moods, sat beside him beneath the stars. Fear before battle is natural, the marshal said quietly. Only a fool feels nothing when facing danger. I'm not afraid of dying, Samuel replied, surprising himself with the truth of it. I'm afraid of failing, of leaving my uncle to die because I wasn't good enough or strong enough. Blackwood placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder, a rare gesture of physical comfort from the stoic lawman. Courage isn't about being fearless, son. It's about doing what's right, despite your fear. Samuel nodded, drawing strength from the marshal's unwavering confidence. In the short time they'd been together, Blackwood had become more than a rescuer or mentor. He had become the father Samuel had lost, a steady presence in a world turned chaotic and cruel. Get some rest, Blackwood advised, rising to take first watch. Tomorrow we scout Eagle Ridge, and then we bring your uncle home. Eagle Ridge rose like a granite sentinel above the surrounding forest, its face scarred by the abandoned mining operations that had once promised wealth to the territory. Blackwood and Samuel lay belly down on a neighboring outcrop, studying the poachers' stronghold through the spyglass. During quiet moments at their camp, Samuel had taken to carving a small wooden bear from a pine knot, using Blackwood's hunting knife with increasing skill. The totem now rested in his pocket, a tactile reminder of the fear he was determined to master. Occasionally his fingers would brush against it, drawing strange comfort from the shape of the very creature that had nearly ended his life. 2 sentries at the main entrance, Blackwood observed, passing the spyglass to Samuel. Another patrolling the western ridge, gun emplacement covering the approach road. Samuel scanned the complex, noting details with his sharp young eyes. The abandoned mining camp had been fortified with crude but effective defenses, felled trees creating barriers, strategic firing positions, cleared sightlines for shooters. There, he said suddenly, directing Blackwood's attention to a small structure set apart from the others. That building has bars on the windows, and someone standing guard. Blackwood nodded grimly. Likely where they're holding your uncle. Count of men? Samuel carefully tracked the movements below. I make it 11. No. 12. One just emerged from that large building, plus Wade and probably Parker, Blackwood added. 14 against our 3. If Harlan comes through, Samuel reminded him. The old man had returned to town to gather additional intelligence, promising to meet them at Eagle Ridge the following day. As dusk approached, they retreated to a sheltered position half a mile from the ridge. Here, protected by dense forest and a natural rock overhang, they could observe without being discovered. The fading light brought increased activity to the camp below, as torches and lanterns were lit. Wade runs a tight operation, Blackwood noted, impressed despite himself. Military precision. Those aren't just poachers down there. What do you mean, the way they move? Maintain security. Those are trained men. Ex-cavalry maybe. Deserters. Samuel considered this new information, its implications sinking in. Makes sense. Stealing an army shipment would require inside knowledge. A wagon rumbled into the camp, drawing their attention. 4 armed men surrounded it as boxes were unloaded and carried into the largest building. Even at this distance, the military markings on the crates were visible. "That's not the main shipment," Blackwood said. "Just supplies, but it confirms we're in the right place." As night fully claimed the mountains, cooking fires bloomed below, and the smell of food wafted upward. Samuel's stomach growled in response. Their own meal had been cold jerky and hardtack, fire being too risky this close to the enemy camp. "Get some sleep," Blackwood advised. "I'll take first watch." But sleep eluded Samuel. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his uncle, imagined him bound and waiting for a death that would come. Once his usefulness ended, the boy sat up, wrapping his blanket tighter against the mountain chill. "Can't sleep?" Blackwood asked softly. Samuel shook his head, thinking about Uncle Jerry, about what they might be doing to him. The marshal's face remained impassive in the darkness, but his voice carried unexpected gentleness. "Your uncle is a strong man. Survivors like him, they endure. How can you know that?" "Because he raised you," Blackwood replied simply, "and you're one of the toughest young men I've ever encountered." The compliment, delivered without sentimentality, meant more to Samuel than any flowery praise. He pulled out his wooden bear carving, fingers tracing its now familiar contours in the darkness. "I keep thinking about that day," Samuel admitted, "tied to the tree, waiting for the bear. I've never been so scared." "Fear's a tool," Blackwood said. "Like any tool, it can serve you or master you." Samuel considered this, turning the carved bear over in his palm. "When I finish this, I'm going to leave it on that tree, as a reminder of what? That I survived." Dawn brought renewed activity to the camp below. Through the spyglass, Samuel observed a familiar figure emerging from the main building. Silas Wade himself, instantly recognizable by his scarred face and commanding presence. The men around him snapped to attention as he passed, confirming Blackwood's assessment of their military background. "There he is," Samuel whispered, hatred and fear mingling in his voice. "The man who left me to die." Blackwood took the glass, studying their adversary. "Remember what I told you about vengeance, Samuel. We're here for your uncle, not revenge." "Why can't it be both?" Samuel challenged. Blackwood turned to the boy, his expression grave. "Because revenge clouds judgment. And where we're going, clear judgment means the difference between life and death." Their observation was interrupted by the sound of a pebble skittering down the slope behind them. Both spun, weapons drawn, to find Harlan approaching with arms raised. "Easy, boys," the old man whispered. "Just me." Harlan settled beside them, producing a folded paper from inside his coat. "Stole this from Parker's office," he said, spreading out what appeared to be a crude map of Eagle Ridge. Layout of the camp, including tunnel access from the old mining days. Samuel stared at the unexpected prize, hope rising for the first time in days. "This could get us in undetected." Blackwood traced the tunnel route with his finger. "It's risky. These old shafts could be collapsed, flooded, or booby-trapped." "It's our best chance," Harlan insisted. "The main shipment arrives tomorrow night. Once those guns are distributed, Wade's men will be unstoppable." The decision crystallized in Samuel's mind with sudden clarity. "We go tonight," he said with newfound authority. "Under cover of darkness, through the tunnels." Blackwood studied his young companion for a long moment, then nodded once. "Tonight." The mountains had their own weather, unpredictable and fierce. As Samuel, Blackwood and Harlan prepared to infiltrate Eagle Ridge, dark clouds gathered with unnatural speed, transforming the late afternoon into premature twilight. The wind shifted, carrying the unmistakable scent of approaching rain. "Storm's coming," Harlan observed, gazing at the churning sky. "Big one." Blackwood studied the rapidly building thunderheads. Could work in our favor. Cover our approach, or trigger landslides and flood those tunnels, Samuel pointed out, having learned to consider all angles from his mentor. They decided to advance their timetable, entering the abandoned mine entrance while daylight still provided some visibility. The old shaft was half collapsed, requiring them to dig away fallen rocks and timber to create a passage barely wide enough for Blackwood's broad shoulders. "I'll go first," Samuel volunteered, his slighter frame better suited to the narrow confines. Blackwood hesitated, then nodded. "Take this," he said, offering a small brass lantern. "Only light it when necessary, and be alert for support timbers that look unstable." The tunnel smelled of damp earth and decay. Samuel crawled forward on hands and knees, feeling his way more than seeing. Behind him, Blackwood and Harlan followed with aching slowness, the confined space challenging for the older men. They had progressed perhaps 100 yards when the first rumble of thunder shook dust from the tunnel ceiling. The sound was different underground, less a crack than a sustained vibration that seemed to come from the mountain itself. "Keep moving," Blackwood urged from behind. "We're still too far from the main shaft." The tunnel began to slope upward, eventually widening enough for them to stand hunched over. Samuel lit the lantern briefly, confirming they had reached a junction marked on Harlan's map. 3 passages branched outward, one continuing upward toward the mining camp, another sloping down, the third extending horizontally into darkness. "That one," Harlan whispered, pointing to the ascending passage, "should lead directly beneath the main compound." The thunder grew louder, more frequent, as they ascended. Soon they could hear the percussion of heavy rain filtering down through the earth above them. Samuel extinguished the lantern as they approached a section where rotted support timbers had partially collapsed. "Careful," he warned, testing each step. "Floors unstable." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a deafening crack of thunder shook the mountain. The vibration dislodged the weakened ceiling, sending a cascade of rocks and soil crashing down between Samuel and his companions. Blackwood's voice came muffled through the debris. "Are you hurt?" "I'm all right," he called back, coughing in the dust-filled air. "But the passage is completely blocked. Can you go back?" Samuel turned, heart sinking as he realized the cave-in extended behind him as well. He was trapped in a small section of tunnel, perhaps 10 feet long, with solid earth on all sides. "No," he admitted, "I'm sealed in." A tense silence followed, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the occasional patter of soil falling from the unstable ceiling. "There's another way," Harlan finally said, his voice strained. "The map shows a vertical air shaft about 30 yards ahead. If the boy can find it, it leads to the surface." "I'll look for it," Samuel called, reigniting the lantern despite the risk. The flickering light revealed a nightmare of fallen rock and splintered timber surrounding him. "Be careful," Blackwood warned. "We'll try to dig through from this side, but it could take hours." "What about you?" Samuel asked, concern evident in his voice. "We'll find another way up," Blackwood assured him. "But Samuel, if you reach the surface, do not approach the camp alone. Hide. Wait for us. That's an order." Samuel reluctantly agreed, though a part of him rebelled at the thought of further delay in rescuing his uncle. With the lantern held high, he began searching for the air shaft Harlan had mentioned. The vertical passage, when he found it, was little more than a narrow chimney cut through the rock, barely wide enough for his shoulders. Rusted iron rungs embedded in its wall offered a precarious ladder to the surface. Extinguishing the lantern and securing it to his belt, Samuel began the claustrophobic ascent. Each iron rung creaked ominously under his weight, threatening to pull free from the crumbling rock. The air grew fresher as he climbed, carrying the charged scent of the storm. When his head finally broke into open air, rain struck his face with stunning force. The storm had intensified into a deluge that transformed the mountainside into a treacherous cascade of mud and debris. Lightning split the sky in jagged patterns, illuminating a landscape transformed by nature's fury. Samuel pulled himself from the shaft, immediately soaked to the skin by the torrential downpour. Visibility was reduced to mere yards, the lights of Eagle Ridge Camp invisible through the curtain of water. Thunder crashed directly overhead, the sound so powerful he felt it in his chest. Disoriented and alone, Samuel sought shelter beneath the massive boughs of a lightning-struck pine. The ancient tree had been split down its middle by some long-ago strike, its two halves now growing apart like outstretched arms. Between them, a hollow space offered minimal protection from the deluge. As he huddled against the trunk, Samuel realized with growing horror that he had emerged on the wrong side of the ridge. The mining camp would be on the opposite slope, perhaps a mile distant through the storm-lashed forest. Blackwood's instructions to wait now seemed impossible to follow. He had no idea where his companions would emerge, and the storm showed no signs of abating. Worse, night was falling rapidly, the combination of storm clouds and sunset creating a darkness nearly as complete as the mine tunnels. Without Blackwood's guidance, Samuel faced a grim choice: remain exposed to the elements possibly for hours, or attempt to navigate the treacherous mountainside alone in search of the camp and his uncle. The decision was made for him when a section of the slope above gave way, sending a wall of mud and broken trees cascading toward his shelter. Samuel scrambled higher, barely escaping the debris flow that engulfed the lightning-struck pine. His momentary haven was gone, swept away in nature's violence. With no other choice, Samuel began moving upslope, using lightning flashes to orient himself toward the ridge crest. From there, he hoped to locate the lights of Eagle Ridge Camp and find a way to his uncle before it was too late. The storm's fury gradually subsided, leaving behind a world transformed by mud and fallen timber. Samuel picked his way across the treacherous terrain, guided by the distant glow of lanterns from Eagle Ridge Camp. His clothes hung heavy with rain and mud, but the physical discomfort paled against the growing dread in his heart. Somewhere in that camp, his uncle awaited rescue, a rescue that now depended solely on a 14-year-old boy separated from his allies. Samuel crouched at the forest edge, studying the camp's layout. The storm had disrupted normal operations, with men working to repair wind damage and clear mudslides from the perimeter. Security appeared relaxed, attention focused on recovery, rather than vigilance. Moving from shadow to shadow, Samuel infiltrated the camp's outer boundary. He navigated between buildings, pressing himself against rain-slick walls whenever patrols passed. The prison structure Blackwood had identified stood near the center of the complex, a sturdy log building with barred windows and a single guard huddled miserably beneath a leaking overhang. Samuel had almost reached the building when a voice froze him in place. "Hold it right there." He turned slowly to find a rifle barrel leveled at his chest. The guard's eyes widened in recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "It's the bear bait." Within minutes, Samuel found himself shoved roughly into the main building, where warmth from a roaring fireplace did little to dispel the chill of terror. Silas Wade sat at a large table covered with maps and papers, his scarred face illuminated by lantern light. He looked up at the commotion, surprise briefly registering before his features settled into calculated interest. "The trapper's nephew," Wade observed, leaning back in his chair. "Back from the dead." Samuel stood as straight as possible, despite the iron shackles now binding his wrists, heavy, rusted restraints that had likely confined many prisoners during the mining camp's original operation. The symbolic weight of these bonds was not lost on the boy. Once again he was captive to the man who had left him to die. "Where's my uncle?" Samuel demanded, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. Wade studied him with clinical detachment. "Spirited, just like your relative. He's alive, for now, more useful that way." As if on cue, the door opened, and two guards dragged in Uncle Jeremiah. Samuel's heart leapt at the sight of his uncle, alive, though battered and thin. Jeremiah's eyes widened in shock when he saw his nephew. "Samuel, my God, boy, How did you? Touching reunion, Wade interrupted, motioning for the guards to restrain Jeremiah. Family's important, isn't it? That's why your uncle has been so cooperative. He believed we'd find and kill you if he wasn't. Samuel met his uncle's gaze, trying to convey strength he didn't entirely feel. Jeremiah gave an almost imperceptible nod, recognition of Samuel's growth, perhaps, or silent encouragement. Now we have you both, Wade continued, circling Samuel with predatory interest, which presents certain opportunities. The door opened again, admitting Sheriff Parker. The lawman stopped short at the sight of Samuel. The boy survived? Parker asked incredulously. Apparently he's resourceful, Wade replied. Makes me wonder how he escaped a situation designed to be inescapable. His cold gaze fixed on Samuel. Who helped you, boy? Samuel remained silent, determined to reveal nothing about Blackwood or Harlan. Wade nodded to one of his men. Take the uncle back to his cell. The boy and I need to have a conversation. As Jeremiah was dragged away, he called out, "Be strong, Samuel." Whatever happens, the closing door cut off his words. Samuel stood alone before Wade and Parker, outwardly calm while his mind raced through the lessons Blackwood had taught him. Observe everything, look for advantages, never surrender hope. Tomorrow night, Wade said conversationally, a shipment of weapons arrives that will change the balance of power in this territory. 200 repeating rifles and ammunition, diverted from army supply lines with the help of our friend the sheriff here. Parker shifted uncomfortably. He doesn't need to know that. Oh, but he does, Wade insisted, because young Samuel is going to help ensure our operation proceeds smoothly. I won't help you, Samuel stated flatly. Wade's laugh held no humor. You misunderstand. Your cooperation isn't required. Just your presence. He leaned closer, his scarred face inches from Samuel's. Your uncle has certain skills we need, knowledge of supply routes through the mountains that don't appear on any map. He's been reluctant to share fully, despite encouragement. Your suffering might prove more persuasive than his own. Samuel fought to control his expression, to hide the fear threatening to overwhelm him. You're going to kill us both anyway. Eventually, Wade acknowledged with disturbing honesty. But the manner of dying, that's negotiable, quick and merciful, or drawn out and instructive. He gestured toward the window, where darkness had fully claimed the night. Your choice. Samuel remained silent, thoughts turning to Blackwood and Harlan. Were they still alive? Had they escaped the tunnels? His only hope lay in playing for time, in surviving until rescue might come. Put him with the others, Wade instructed his men, apparently tiring of the conversation. Let him see what happens to those who interfere with progress. As rough hands dragged him from the building, Samuel caught a final glimpse of Wade, bent over his maps, planning the operation that would arm criminals throughout the territory. The scarred man looked up, meeting Samuel's gaze with cold finality. Welcome back to the land of the living, boy, Wade called after him. However briefly you remain there, the makeshift prison that had once been the mining camp's tool shed held 5 occupants besides Samuel. 3 were local trappers, gaunt from weeks of captivity. Another was a government surveyor who had stumbled upon Wade's operation while mapping the territory. The last, to Samuel's shock, was a young Shoshone man barely older than himself. They caught me hunting on my people's traditional grounds, the native youth explained when Samuel asked. Said I saw things I shouldn't. In the dim light filtering through the barred windows, Samuel examined his surroundings. The shed's walls were solid logs, its door reinforced with iron bands. A single guard stood watch outside, rotating with others every few hours. They're keeping us alive as leverage, one of the trappers whispered. Each of us has something or someone Wade can use against us. Samuel's fingers probed the splintered floorboards, searching for anything that might serve as a tool or weapon. Beneath a rotting corner board, he discovered the thin, curved rib bone of some long-dead animal. Working silently in the shadows, he began scraping one end against the rough floor, slowly sharpening it to a crude point. By dawn, Samuel had fashioned a primitive bone whistle from his discovery. The small instrument produced no sound when blown normally, Its design allowed air to pass through special chambers that created a high-pitched tone, audible only at a specific distance. Blackwood had shown him how Cheyenne scouts used similar devices to signal each other without alerting enemies. "What's that for?" the Shoshone youth asked, watching curiously. "A message," Samuel replied simply. If Blackwood was alive and searching for him, the distinct tone might guide his mentor while remaining inaudible to the guards. Throughout the day, Samuel took turns with the other prisoners, keeping watch through the barred windows, memorizing guard rotations and camp layout. Wade's operation was more extensive than he'd initially realized. Beyond weapons trafficking, the outlaw was systematically stripping the territory of valuable resources, animal parts for the Chinese market, timber for the growing settlements, and minerals from reopened sections of the mine. "He's building an empire," the surveyor observed bitterly. With corrupt officials like Parker protecting him, Wade could control everything between Helena and the Canadian border. In the afternoon, the door swung open to admit Uncle Jeremiah, supported between two guards. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, but his back remained straight with stubborn dignity. The guards thrust him roughly into the shed before locking the door once more. "Uncle Jerry," Samuel rushed to help his uncle to a sitting position against the wall. Jeremiah's good eye widened at the sight of his nephew. "Samuel," he breathed, reaching out with trembling hands to touch the boy's face. "When they told me they'd caught you, I feared the worst." "I'm all right," Samuel assured him, though the shackles still binding his wrists suggested otherwise. Jeremiah's expression darkened. "They shouldn't have brought you here. You should be far away from this place." "I came to rescue you," Samuel said, the words sounding childish even to his own ears. A pained smile crossed his uncle's battered face. "Always were a determined boy." He lowered his voice. "But you can't fight men like Wade alone." "I'm not alone," Samuel whispered, glancing toward the windows. "Marshal Blackwood is coming." Hope and doubt warred in Jeremiah's expression. "A marshal? Here?" Samuel quickly explained everything: his rescue from the tree, Blackwood's training, their discovery of Wade's true operation, and the failed tunnel approach during the storm. "If he survived the cave-in, he'll find us," Samuel concluded with more confidence than he felt. As evening approached, the prisoners were given meager rations of stale bread and tepid water. Through the windows, they observed increased activity in the camp, men checking weapons, wagons being prepared. "The shipment arrives tomorrow," Jeremiah confirmed. "Wade questioned me again about the hidden passes through the mountains. Wanted to know which routes would be safe from army patrols." "Did you tell him?" Jeremiah's expression hardened. "Some things a man doesn't share, no matter the cost." In the growing darkness, Samuel surreptitiously tested his bone whistle, sending its silent signal into the night. No response came. The other prisoners huddled together for warmth as temperature dropped with nightfall, sharing what little comfort could be found in their collective misery. "We can't wait to be rescued," the Shoshone youth said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Tomorrow, once the weapons arrive, they will have no more use for us." Murmurs of agreement rose from the others. Even Jeremiah nodded grimly. "We need to create our own opportunity," Samuel said, thinking like Blackwood would. "When they come for us tomorrow, we'll be ready." Using a small stone, Samuel scratched a crude map of the compound on the floor. The prisoners gathered around, offering their observations of guard positions and routines. Together, they began formulating a desperate plan, not just for escape, but for disrupting Wade's entire operation. "Even if we fail," the surveyor said soberly, "we might create enough chaos for someone to get word to the authorities." "We won't fail," Samuel insisted, the determination in his voice surprising even himself. Somewhere in the darkness beyond their prison, he had to believe Blackwood was watching, waiting for the right moment to act. Their separate plans would converge, creating the opportunity they all needed. As the others finally succumbed to exhausted sleep, Samuel remained awake, periodically sounding his bone whistle toward the surrounding forest. Shortly before midnight, his vigilance was rewarded with a response, so faint he nearly missed it, 3 low whistles in a pattern. Blackwood had taught him. The signal for "I am here. Be ready." Samuel closed his eyes briefly, relief washing through him. Blackwood had survived. Tomorrow, when Wade's men came for the prisoners, they would find not resigned victims, but fighters prepared to seize their one chance at freedom and justice. Dawn broke over Eagle Ridge with an unnatural stillness. The aftermath of the storm had cleared the air, leaving a crystalline quality to the light that illuminated every detail of the mining camp with harsh clarity. From their prison window, Samuel watched as Wade's men made final preparations for the weapons shipment, checking the road, positioning guards, readying the storage buildings. "They'll come for us soon," Jeremiah murmured, joining his nephew at the window. "When they do, remember what we planned." Samuel nodded, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. The crude plan they'd developed during the night hinged on perfect timing and more than a little luck. The surveyor, who had once been a Union Army lieutenant, had helped refine their strategy into something with at least a chance of success. "What if Blackwood doesn't come?" whispered one of the trappers, giving voice to the doubt they all felt. "Then we fight anyway," Samuel replied with quiet certainty. The bone whistle he'd crafted hung from a string around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt, a talisman of hope in their desperate circumstances. Shortly after midday, heavy boots approached their prison. The door swung open to reveal Clayton, Wade's youngest associate, flanked by 2 armed guards. "Up, all of you," Clayton ordered, gesturing with his rifle. "Boss wants everyone where he can see them when the shipment arrives." The prisoners rose slowly, feigning greater weakness than they felt. As they shuffled toward the door, Samuel caught the eye of the Shoshone youth and gave an almost imperceptible nod. The native boy stumbled deliberately, falling against one of the guards with a convincing groan. "Get up, you redskin." The guard snarled, shoving the youth roughly. In that moment of distraction, Samuel reached for the guard's belt, where a ring of keys hung alongside a hunting knife in a leather sheath. With the deft fingers of a trapper's apprentice, he palmed both items before being prodded forward into the harsh sunlight. The prisoners were marched to the center of the compound, where Wade stood surveying his domain like a feudal lord. Sheriff Parker was at his side, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. A dozen armed men formed a perimeter around them. "Gentlemen," Wade addressed the prisoners, "today marks the beginning of a new era in this territory. By nightfall, my organization will control the most formidable arsenal between St. Louis and San Francisco." His cold eyes swept over them. "Unfortunately, your services will no longer be required once our shipment arrives." Samuel's fingers worked silently behind his back, using the stolen key to unlock his shackles while keeping them in place to maintain the illusion of restraint. Beside him, he felt rather than saw his uncle, tensing in readiness. "The wagon convoy has left Helena," Parker reported, checking his pocket watch. "Should arrive within the hour." Wade nodded in satisfaction. "Excellent. Once the shipment is secured, dispose of our guests. Make it quick. I'm not unnecessarily cruel." "Could have fooled me," Jeremiah muttered, earning a sharp glance from Wade. "Your defiance has cost you dearly, trapper," Wade said. "Had you simply cooperated from the beginning, you might have earned a place in our enterprise. Rather die honest than live as a snake," Jeremiah retorted. A commotion at the edge of the camp interrupted the exchange. One of Wade's men came running, rifle in hand. "Riders approaching from the north," he reported. "Not the shipment. They're coming through the forest trail." Wade's expression hardened. "How many? Can't tell yet. At least 3, maybe more." "Parker, take half the men and intercept them," Wade ordered. "No one interferes today." As the sheriff departed with 6 armed men, Samuel caught sight of movement in the trees beyond the camp's edge, a flash of color that might have been Blackwood's distinctive bandana. Their moment had arrived. "Now," Samuel shouted, dropping his shackles and lunging forward with the stolen knife. The compound erupted into chaos. The prisoners moved with coordinated precision, each targeting their nearest guard. The surveyor tackled Clayton, while the trappers and the Shoshone youth overwhelmed two other guards. Jeremiah, despite his injuries, launched himself at the nearest man with surprising strength. Samuel's initial strike missed its mark as his target dodged, but he recovered quickly, using the techniques Blackwood had taught him. A feint, a sidestep, and then a decisive blow that sent the guard's rifle clattering to the ground. Wade's response was immediate and violent. He drew his revolver and fired, the bullet striking one of the trappers in the shoulder. The injured man fell but continued grappling with his opponent from the ground. From one of the storage buildings, a guard emerged carrying a torch, a simple pine branch wrapped with oil-soaked rags, its flame bright even in daylight. Samuel recognized the opportunity instantly. "The ammunition shed," he shouted to the Shoshone youth, who had managed to obtain a rifle. Understanding flashed between them. The native boy adjusted his aim and fired at the torch, striking it perfectly. The impact sent the flaming brand spinning through the air to land on the roof of the building where Wade had been storing powder and bullets for the incoming shipment. Dry timber, still hot from days of summer sun, caught immediately. Flames spread across the roofline with frightening speed, sending Wade's men running in panic toward the growing blaze. In the confusion, Samuel worked his way toward his uncle, who was locked in desperate combat with one of Wade's lieutenants. Using the hunting knife, he struck at the man's legs, not to kill but to disable. The guard howled in pain and collapsed. "This way," Samuel urged, pulling Jeremiah toward the edge of the camp, where he had seen Blackwood's signal. But their path was suddenly blocked by Silas Wade himself, his scarred face contorted with rage, revolver leveled at Samuel's chest. "You," Wade snarled. "Twice you've disrupted my business. There won't be a third time." As Wade's finger tightened on the trigger, a thunderous gunshot split the air, but it was Wade who staggered, a look of surprise replacing his murderous glare as a crimson stain blossomed on his chest. Marshal Blackwood stepped from the tree line, Winchester rifle still raised, his face set in grim determination. "That's enough, Wade," he said simply. "It's over." Silas Wade fell to his knees, blood seeping between the fingers he pressed to his chest. His silver pistol, an ornate revolver with pearl grips that had likely ended many lives, clattered to the dirt beside him. For a man who had orchestrated so much suffering, Wade looked surprisingly ordinary in his moment of defeat, his face registering not rage, but a kind of bewildered disbelief. "You shot me," he said, the statement almost childlike in its simplicity. "Wing shot," Blackwood corrected, approaching cautiously with his Winchester still trained on Wade. "You'll live to stand trial." Samuel stood frozen, the hunting knife still clutched in his hand, unable to reconcile the fearsome figure who had haunted his nightmares with this suddenly diminished man bleeding in the dust. Jeremiah placed a steadying hand on his nephew's shoulder. "Marshal Blackwood," Wade said, recognition dawning in his eyes, "your reputation precedes you. They said you never venture this far north." "Made an exception," Blackwood replied without emotion. "Found something worth the journey." His gaze shifted briefly to Samuel, conveying volumes in that momentary glance. Pride, relief, a touch of reproof for disobeying orders, all communicated without words. The camp around them was in chaos. The ammunition shed blazed fiercely, periodic explosions sending debris into the air as stored bullets and powder ignited. Wade's men were scattered, some fighting the fire, others engaged with the rebelling prisoners, a few fleeing into the surrounding forest. Harlan appeared from the trees, leading a group of armed men that Samuel recognized as homesteaders from the valley. The old man had apparently raised a militia while Blackwood created a diversion. "Sheriff Parker and his deputies are secured," Harlan reported. "Caught them in a crossfire when they tried to ambush you." Blackwood nodded in acknowledgement, his attention never leaving Wade. "Samuel," he said quietly, "take that pistol." Samuel hesitated, only briefly before retrieving Wade's silver revolver from the ground. The weapon was heavier than he expected, its balance perfect, its silver surface engraved with intricate patterns. A killer's tool made beautiful, the contradiction seemed fitting for a man like Wade. "You have a choice now," Blackwood told Samuel, his voice level. "This man left you to die. He kidnapped your uncle, burned your home. By frontier justice, you'd be within your rights." Samuel stared at the pistol in his hand, then at Wade, who watched him with a calculating gaze despite his injury. "He deserves to die," Samuel said, the words sounding hollow even as he spoke them. "Perhaps," Blackwood agreed, "but deserving and doing are different matters. One question you need to answer: what kind of man do you want to become?" The camp had grown strangely quiet. The prisoners and Harlan's militia had subdued the remaining guards. All eyes were on the tableau formed by the marshal, the boy, and the wounded outlaw. Samuel raised the pistol, pointing it at Wade's heart. His hand trembled slightly, but his grip was firm. Wade's expression shifted from calculation to something approaching respect. "You've got the sand for it, boy," he said softly. "I see that now." For a terrible moment, Samuel saw two futures unfold before him. One where he pulled the trigger, dispensing a frontier justice that no one would question. Another where he set aside vengeance for something harder, something that Blackwood had been teaching him since the day they met. He lowered the pistol. "I want to be the kind of man who remembers the difference between justice and revenge," Samuel said, echoing words Blackwood had spoken during their training. He turned to his mentor. "You told me vengeance serves only the one dealing it. Justice serves everyone." Relief and pride mingled in Blackwood's weather-worn face. He nodded once, acknowledging both Samuel's decision and the growth it represented. "Harlan," he called, "bind Mr. Wade's wound and secure him for transport. He has an appointment with a federal judge in Helena." As Harlan and two militiamen took custody of the outlaw, Blackwood turned his full attention to Samuel and Jeremiah. The marshal's customary reserve cracked, just enough to reveal genuine emotion as he clasped first the uncle's hand, then pulled Samuel into a brief, fierce embrace. "Disobeyed my direct order," he said gruffly. "Could have gotten yourself killed. Learn from the best," Samuel replied with the ghost of a smile. "Sometimes you have to take risks for what matters." Jeremiah watched this exchange with growing understanding. "You've taught my nephew well, Marshal," he said, extending his hand. "I owe you a debt that can never be repaid." "No debt," Blackwood assured him. "The boy's got natural ability, just needed direction." The immediate crisis had passed, but much remained to be done. The freed prisoners required medical attention. Wade's operation needed to be fully dismantled. The weapons shipment was still en route, unaware that its destination had been compromised. As if reading Samuel's thoughts, Blackwood outlined the next. "Harlan's men will escort the prisoners and captives back to town. We'll set up an ambush for the weapons convoy at Eagle Pass. With Wade and Parker in custody, the rest should fall into place." "We'll help," Samuel said immediately, including his uncle in the offer. Blackwood's expression turned stern. "Your uncle needs medical attention, and you've done enough fighting for someone your age." "With respect, Marshal," Jeremiah interjected, straightening. "Despite his injuries, my nephew's earned the right to see this through. As have I." An understanding passed between the two men, recognition of Samuel's transition from boy to young man, accelerated by circumstances, but no less genuine for its urgency. "Very well," Blackwood conceded. "But you follow orders this time, both of you." As they prepared to depart, Samuel approached the now secured Wade one final time. The outlaw looked up at him with a mixture of hatred and reluctant respect. "You should have pulled that trigger, boy," Wade said softly. "I would have." "I know," Samuel replied simply. "That's the difference between us." He placed the silver pistol in Blackwood's outstretched hand, turning his back on Wade and the path of vengeance he might have taken. Whatever came next, he had made his choice about the kind of man he would become. Timber Creek had transformed in the 3 months since Wade's capture. With Sheriff Parker removed and his corrupt deputies imprisoned, a new sense of order prevailed in the frontier settlement. The territorial governor had appointed an interim sheriff, a former army captain with a reputation for fairness, until proper elections could be held. Samuel stood on the newly constructed boardwalk outside the general store, watching as workmen hung a freshly painted sign above the law office across the street. The words "Marshal" gleamed in gold letters against dark wood, a symbol of federal authority now permanently established in the Northern Territory. "Still can't believe they're setting up an official marshal's office here," Jeremiah commented, joining his nephew. The older man's injuries had healed, though he still walked with a slight limp that might never fully disappear. "Blackwood says the territory's growing too fast for just circuit riders," Samuel replied. "They need lawmen stationed permanent." Inside the law office, Blackwood was concluding a meeting with territorial officials. Through the window, Samuel could see his mentor's tall figure gesturing toward a wall map, likely explaining patrol routes or jurisdiction boundaries. The marshal had spent weeks helping dismantle Wade's criminal network, tracking down associates and recovering stolen weapons. "He leaving today?" Jeremiah asked, following Samuel's gaze. Samuel nodded, a complex mix of emotions tightening his chest. "Due back in Helena to testify at Wade's trial." The bell above the law office door jangled as Blackwood emerged, carrying his saddlebags. He nodded to several townspeople as he crossed the street, his manner cordial but reserved as always. "All set?" Jeremiah asked when the marshal reached them. "As much as government business ever is," Blackwood replied with the hint of a smile. He turned to Samuel. "Walk with me to the livery." They moved down the street together, falling into the comfortable rhythm they'd developed during their weeks of travel. Shadow awaited at the stable, freshly shod and supplied for the journey south. The magnificent black stallion nickered in recognition as Blackwood approached. "Got something for you," the marshal said, reaching into his coat. He withdrew an envelope sealed with the territorial governor's stamp. "Been meaning to give you this for a while now." Samuel accepted the envelope with curiosity. Breaking the seal, he removed official-looking papers covered with formal script and government seals. His eyes widened as he realized what he was holding. "Adoption paper," he whispered, looking up in disbelief. Blackwood shifted uncomfortably, unused to discussing personal matters. "If you and your uncle agree," he said gruffly, "thought you might want to continue your training." Officially, Samuel turned to Jeremiah, who was smiling with unexpected warmth. "Your uncle and I have discussed it," Blackwood continued. "He'd remain family, of course, visit whenever he wants, but you'd have a place with me in Helena, learn the law business properly." "You knew about this?" Samuel asked his uncle. Jeremiah nodded. "Been watching you these past months, Samuel. The way you've taken to Marshal Blackwood's teaching, the way you handled yourself through everything." He placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder. "Your parents would be proud of the young man you're becoming, and they'd want you to follow the path that calls to you." Samuel looked back at the adoption papers, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. After losing so much, his parents, his home, nearly his life, something new and unexpected was being offered. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a different future with purpose and meaning. "I'd be honored," he said finally, his voice steady despite the tears pricking at his eyes. Blackwood cleared his throat, clearly moved but determined to maintain his composure. "Good then. We'll finalize everything after the trial." He began securing his saddlebags to Shadow's saddle. "Speaking of which, I should get moving if I want to make the mountain pass before dark." As the marshal mounted up, Samuel remembered something. "Wait," he said. "There's something I need to do before you go." An hour later, the three stood before the ancient oak tree where Samuel's ordeal had begun. The rope scars on the trunk had already begun to heal, new bark slowly covering the wounds just as Samuel's own rope burns had faded to faint silver lines on his wrists. From his pocket, Samuel withdrew the small wooden bear he had carved during their day's tracking way. He placed it in a natural hollow at the base of the tree, a private monument to what had happened there. "Ready?" Blackwood asked, understanding the significance of the moment. Samuel nodded, taking a final look at the tree that had nearly been his end, but had instead become the beginning of his new life. "Ready." They rode out together, Samuel, Blackwood and Jeremiah through the golden afternoon light. At the fork where the trails diverged, Jeremiah embraced his nephew one last time. "I'll come visit once you're settled," he promised, "and you'll always have a home with me when you want it." "I know," Samuel said, the simple words carrying the weight of family bonds that could stretch but never break. As Samuel and Blackwood continued toward Helena and the new life awaiting them there, the young man felt a strange sense of completion. The circle that had begun with terror and desperation had transformed into something he could never have imagined. A future built on justice rather than vengeance, on building rather than destroying. "Something on your mind?" Blackwood asked. Noticing his contemplative expression, Samuel smiled. Sitting taller in the saddle of his own horse, a gift from the grateful settlers of Timber Creek. "Just thinking that sometimes the worst moments of your life can lead to the best." Blackwood nodded in silent agreement, and together they rode toward the waiting horizon. Marshal and apprentice, father and son, two rangers bringing justice to a wild land that needed them both.